Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
I woke up chained to the wall. Pain rippled across my head, my mind. I kept the panic down. Easier said than done. Self-control is taught, not given. I was not in immediate danger. I was stripped down to my shirt and pants. I had lost my shoes and socks, coat, overcoat, suspenders, and other clothing to my captor. He had gone through my pockets, my pants pockets, my hidden pants pockets, and my shirt pocket. I could tell just by the weight. Why do you think I wear suspenders, Control? Fashion? I stayed within myself. I had options. I would not panic. I had not moved yet. I was lying on a well-made concrete floor. It was cold and damp, as if it had only been laid recently. The wall I could see was made of cinder blocks. The chain led to some kind of eye hook. My left and right arms were chained to it. I couldn't see any breaks in the chain connection. If I shortened one end, the other got longer. I was shocked I wasn't noosed or otherwise bound so that it tightened if I fought. I heard shuffling behind me. It tapped on something, and a panel scraped open. I barely breathed. My body was so close to the position I had when I woke up. A minute rolled by. My body cramped, but I ignored it. Deception was worth the pain. I heard a groan echo through the vents. Jack. The panel slammed shut, and our captor stomped away. I could determine a few things. Our captor was a heavy-set man. I could hear him breathe even when standing still. The man could peer through the panel without making motions. That implied stooping or standing on tiptoes. He sounded like he was wearing shoes, maybe boots. I took the risk and sat up. The room around me wasn't much more than the cinder blocks I had been tied to. A plain, gray room hemmed me. There was a light above my head, a small window above the ring hook, and a black metal door with a sliding panel. A vent pumped in fresh air. Would that I could crawl in. First, I had several pockets sewn into my pants, which are also sewn shut within the inside seam. This includes the hem at the bottom of my pants leg, a pocket along the side of my left knee, and, most importantly, a very thin blade along my right thigh. I have a lot of time on my hands, Control, and fashion for the hunted woman is an obsession of mine. My arsenal was a set of lockpicks, a thin stiletto blade that barely counted as a knife, and some piano wire. I was out of my handcuffs and free in a moment. He should have bought padlocks I couldn't buy at a dollar store. Jack was still groaning. Whatever had happened had hit him worse. I could hear another door panel slide open. Now was the time to move. The door was locked on one side. No doorknob, just a metal plate where there should have been one. The panel he used to see me was unlocked. I slid it open. It was wide enough for my hands. He'd have been better served by a one-way glass. With the mirror surface of my knife, I could see his doorknob. He had chosen a handle instead of a knob or other, more secure device. A mistake I could use. I had enough wire. It took a few casts. I had to use the flat of the knife to angle it right. I pulled, praying it would not cut on my knife's blade or cut deep into my hands. The door handle clicked. I was free. I padded out into the hall, walking toe to heel to avoid making sound. The floor was concrete like the rest, but older than the cell I had been kept in. Now came the choice. Run and save Jack later, or save Jack now. It was no choice. The concrete hallway was about 6 feet long. I stalked, quieter than a church mouse, to my left, where I had heard him walk. I saw him from the back. It was a man, over 6 foot tall, obese, but his calves implied he exercised. I would have been an idiot to underestimate him, doughy or no. Somehow, he had gotten his hands on me and Jack. I was still struggling to remember how this had happened. A car crash, but it was foggy. A flash of noise and screaming metal. No more. Something I did not like was happening, and my brain would not cooperate. I skittered back. The man was a blank. Something about him wasn't him. Do you understand? Looking at someone and knowing nothing about them. No character, no laugh lines. A little of this, a little of that, but nothing in the end. You could see its absence. It wasn't filled with anything. He was empty. He was watching my son groaning in pain. Nothing else. It caused me to shiver. I could understand a pervert or a sadist or whatever. He just watched like he was a scientist. I investigated the area. The hallway went around a center column that was about 7 to 8 feet wide. At the center of each hall opposite the column was a door. Only Jack's was occupied. The stairway up was to the right of my old cell. My plan was simple. I kicked my door and slapped the stairway. Then I ran down the opposite way I heard him turn. That part was easy. He wasn't fast, and he made a lot of noise. He took the bait. He rushed up the stairs. I stayed out of sight and went into Jack's room. I heard the man stomp above our heads. Jack's room was set up like mine. Nothing but the chain and the hook. His head rolled on his shoulders. I saw blood spill from a head wound. It seized at my heart. I wanted to panic. I knew we would die if I did. Then came the anger. The black rage. My sight expanded. I saw every hurt on my son's body. I wanted claws. I wanted teeth. I wanted blood. I kept my wits about me. He wasn't dying. He wasn't dying. I examined him. Jack wore just his shirt and pants. To his misfortune, he had been wearing new church clothes I had not prepared with the same tricks as I wore yet. I was a failure of a mother. I would do better. He groaned as I touched his chest. He probably had a broken rib. If there had been a car crash, he had taken the brunt of it. I tore off some of my pants leg to bind his head wound. It didn't take long before I had him up and... I didn't realize how tall he was, Control. He just keeps growing. I was under his shoulder, and he could barely stand up straight. He was responsive, but unsteady on his feet. With a few words, I made him understand what he needed to do. The two of us got out of his cell. The lock on his chains was the same manufacturer as mine, and I took a few drops of his blood and smeared it on the opposite direction we went. Can't overthink. I had to move fast. The man rushed down, saw the blood on the floor, and ran to my cell. His boots stomped and stomped. He didn't say anything. I could see he had a gun. He waved it in my cell, then ran back upstairs. I heard crashing above. I waited. Let the man panic. But Jack still bled. He had soaked the bandage through already. Men's lives are measured in blood pressure. I couldn't tell how serious the wound was until we had time. Back alley doctors are hard to come by in the Ozarks, but I knew a veterinarian with delusions of doctorhood. I heard another door slam. It was time to move. I had pulled Jack up the stairs. His equilibrium was shot, but he was coming around more and more. We emerged into another basement. A maze of trash met us. Columns of stuff piled from floor to ceiling. Stacks of newspapers arranged into pillars more numerous than Memphis, Egypt. Wardrobes, chests of drawers, and other furniture of all kinds lined the walls and the pillars of paper. Boxes and piles of filth were laid about the whole area. A hearth of bricks piled here, a mountain of jars there. Everything filthy. Everything purposeless. It was like looking into the mind of a schizophrenic. There was nothing worth anything, but he was always talking. I hated my captor more. Underneath our feet lay a carpet of used range targets. Some were bad shots. Some were center of mass and tight grouping. Set into one wall was a thin window not blocked by furniture. I was too thick in the chest and hips, but Jack was still thin and lanky enough to fit. I could send him through to find help. He was gaining more and more consciousness now. He stood on his own power. I held his head as I told him the plan. He would go into town and, well, tell the truth. Someone had hit us with a car and then captured us. I cannot tell you where we were, Control, but I had vetted the police. They were more likely to do something. First, Tom Morrow had fought with some of their fathers in Germany. Second, no Masons. They held proper Christian beliefs that the mysteries of such lodges kept men from God. Third, they went out of their way to help their community, without publicity. And they were an hour closer than Gregory Horvath. I want to stay with you. We can fight him. Jack, we could, if you were 100%, and we had our weapons. This man looked to be 300 pounds of muscle and fat. He has a gun and will use it. We need a gun. This place? No normal person who hasn't committed cold-blooded murder builds something like those cells for... what? To see if he likes serial killing? No. He has the advantage. We need an edge. You know the numbers. Get to a phone, call the police, call Control. Do what you need to do. His voice was a little loud, and I put my hands over his mouth. I shook my head. He nodded, but I saw anger. So much anger. He grabbed my wrist. I took my hands off of his lips and let him snarl at me in his anger. I dragged him to the window. It was not barred, and it was wide enough to fit. With a burst of effort, I tilted the window on its pivot and forced the pane from its hinges. It snapped with a sound like gunfire. The man was running. I kept Jack back until I heard him make for the stairwell. I stuffed my son up into the open window, quick as thought. He scraped his ears and back, but I didn't let him dwell on the pain. Hysterics did not take hold of me, but I shook like a leaf when he pulled himself out with his own power. Safe. My son was safe. Jack was through and ran for the forest. I slammed the wardrobe door and then dived behind a particularly thick column of magazines. The hoarder house gave me one advantage. There were so many little places I could slither to, and between and under. I would not be caught. I would find little holes and escape his vision. I would do it longer than he had the will to look for me. I prayed. The man ran through the door and charged for the window. I backed around him, already looking for an angle I could use to make a run for the door without being shot in the back. I could hope that he'd miss, but those ranged targets stopped me. Rash decisions, quicker funerals. I haven't stayed this free this long without being careful. The man pulled out his gun. I could see it now. It was a revolver. The man's wrist, finger position. He was comfortable with it. The gun, a Smith & Wesson .357 of some type, was not just some rusty piece a freak might find in a trash heap and mistake it for power. It was finely crafted, smooth, as if designed for target shooting, fast and clean. I could have groaned. I was right to think the man experienced with his gun. I was making my way through the trash piles when the man stopped his investigation of the wardrobe I had slammed. He waited with his back turned for a moment. I ducked down, my cheek in the moldy rot of some sort of decayed cookbook. I felt something scurry under the hard cover. I could hear him search. I imagined him with his gun out, pointing to the door just to see if I had made a break for it. A lesser woman would. He strode over to the door and locked it. He put the key on a hook by the door. What a trap. I wanted that key more than I wanted my mother dead. And it was right there, just hanging in the air. I could pull it and unlock it before he had his aim, right? Oh, a joke. Only one of us was going to leave this room alive. Monster. I am not going to go down without a fight. For a long moment, we played at cat and mouse. He started with the trap door, checking, listening for me hiding there. I hid behind him and moved from pile to pile. He stood, looking over the parapets of junk and nonsense things. No joy for him. So he quickly jumped over a likely wall, pointing his gun in all directions. I was behind the brick pile and could not be seen. If I had my coat, my grandfather's hat, and more, I would have been caught. My profile would have been too large. My coattails would drag, and my shoes would have tapped. Instead, I moved from toe tip to fingertip. I dreaded the feel of the dirt. Not clean, honest dirt, but human dirt. Disgusting, and more feral than a pile of droppings. But accepted contours of the room, as if I hid from worse than a simple man with a gun. How strange it would seem to younger me. Ignorant of the world, ignorant of sin. Or to the me that had birthed Jack, hungry and wanting. Always hungry and wanting. He vaulted through a pile of jars and sent the mason jars rolling in all directions. He had his gun pointed at a pile of clothes. I stayed underneath a long arch of tables covered in silverware. I found a knife. It wasn't a killing knife or a butter knife. It was a steak knife. It had a pointed tip and a serrated edge. I could kill with it. That's all that mattered. Now, the game had changed. A woman with a knife cannot kill a man with a gun in a straight fight. But I was an ambush predator. I found a good spot behind the bricks in a forest of women's clothing and waited. I am a spider in its den, crocodile mouth open. I am a jaguar ready to pounce. I remembered the times I was out of bullets and needed meat and fat. I would still myself, willing Jack to stay silent, waiting for that moment to strike, slitting a deer's throat, striking a salmon in the stream. My muscles coiled and ready. My will, steel. My blade, death. It was then, when I was weak with hunger, desperate, insane with malnutrition, unable to speak for weeks at a time. It was only a year, but it was so long in my mind. Sometimes I doubted it was a year. If I'm not careful, I remember the eternity of that first night, when I saw things unsaintly mortals should never see. Now, I was a woman in her physical prime. Fed, uninjured, exercised. I could deadlift 250 pounds. I could bench nearly 150. I wasn't going to win any bodybuilding competitions, but I could do my bloody work. Let's see the monster aim with my knife in his throat and my body on his shooting arm. It took all my will to keep breathing calm and even. My blood was rising to my eyes. I would make him bleed. He came closer. He stood next to the brick pile again. I was nestled deep into the forest blind of hanging clothing. He turned away. Now! I burst out, leaping as fast as thought. He was quick. His gun turned to me and fired. He was fast. I knew the risk. I would slay or be dead. The bullet passed by my head, ripping off a chunk of hair and scalp, but missing my skull. I was in his reach. The bullet had stopped my momentum enough that his throat was out of my quick strike. His other hand reached for me. He was unsure of himself. I would take his life for that. It took all my force and momentum, but I jammed the steak knife into his ribs. He gasped with shock, his right arm no longer seeking me, but the knife. I grappled his shooting arm at the elbow, still out straight, and jammed my body against it. I heard it snap. The man gasped again, his remaining arm flailing, his other powerless. His fingers did not have the strength for the trigger. I grabbed the knife and wrenched it out. I jammed it into his chest again and again. Each blow took all my strength to rip the dull serrated edge out of his ribs and muscles. I remembered myself and went for his throat. My world turned upside down. My head cracked against the floor, and I vomited. I had been hit with a brick. The man's remaining arm had grabbed one of the bricks and smashed it against my head. I did not think the brick was broken. I had broken. My skull felt cracked from left jaw to the very top of my head. My ears were maelstroms. My strength left me. I had nothing but pain. I retched, trying to get back to my feet, trying to get away. How had the man shrugged off the vicious stabbing? I could not fathom it. The man sat up, bending at the waist with no sign of effort. He stared at his useless gun hand, then at the knife caught in his collar and shoulder muscles. He shrugged. I crawled away. He got to his feet. I prayed, begged for deliverance. Lord God, please. He stood over me, brick in his good hand. He was over me, whispering into my ear. I reached for something, anything that I could use to defend myself. I live for this part. I get to shatter a stained glass window. God made you, and I get to end your life. It's beautiful. I'll see the lights going out, and you deflate like a balloon, like shards of glass, falling onto a concrete ground you will never get pieced back together. Never pieced back together. That's it. One window. And I get to throw a brick through it. He raised the brick. I hoped I would not live through the first strike. Instead, God answered my wordless, screaming prayer. Like a juggernaut, Jack shouldered through the door and charged the killer. Eyes glowing with battle light. Jack tackled him and had his chest under his thighs. Screaming with rage, Jack ripped the steak knife from the killer's shoulder and got to work. He struck wildly. One blow ripped off an ear. Another jammed the blade to the hilt into his rib cage. The killer coughed blood. Jack tried to wrench the blade out of the man's chest. He went low, and the man struck. The brick cracked Jack's forehead. Jack's eyes bled. It did not stop my son for a second. He became even more enraged. His voice came out ragged, insane. It wasn't words. It was just a babble of wrath and ruin. His hands became a blur. Blood burst from the man's chest, and flesh was carved away in gouts of red gore. I don't know when the man died. It was a long time before I could find my feet. Jack continued to stab and stab. I could see more bone than skin on the man's chest. I could see the heart not beating. My inner ear was shot, but I got to my knees and I held my son's body until he stopped. Jack! His body shuddered. His breath matched mine. He gasped. We're going after Grandpa and Tom. I could not find the strength to fight him. Okay. We're not going to stop until we find them. Or their bones. There was more, but I must keep that private. We were blood-stained, vomit-covered, and weeping. My son unburdened himself into me. I almost wish God had not answered my prayer for deliverance, but I remembered the Jack of the future. What he had become. The killing that never ended for him. I had to fight for his soul. I wished Orion and Tom were here more than ever. I remember what happened. Jack and I were driving home from church. We were fighting over what had happened to Orion and Tom. We were shouting at each other. Then it went black. We would fight over this forever, or I could give in. Control, send me Tom and Orion's last mission. All the information, uncensored, unredacted. Every last piece of information. We're going after them. Dead or alive. Morrow out.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ben Wheeler and performed by Celina Saucedo. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.